Everyday Orthodox with your host, Elisa Davis. We get together on Sunday nights to meet everyday Orthodox Christians. We're hoping to get to know the members of the body of Christ across all of our various jurisdictions and regions. We may worship in various languages or even on different calendars, but we have so much in common. Come get to know someone new and see how they're living out this Orthodox faith in another corner of the world. After all, every person is an icon of Christ, and as we'll see, every person has a story to tell. If you have a question for tonight's guest, we invite you to call in and join the conversation at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-AF-RADIO. Now, here's Elisa.
Welcome to Ancient Faith Radio. It is May 22nd, 2022, and we are live. I'm Elisa Davis, and this is Everyday Orthodox. We get together on Sunday nights to get to know Orthodox Christians and to build community through conversation. You know, our Orthodox community can be so fragmented. We're split into different jurisdictions and we worship in different languages. And of course, there's also the regional thing. You know, some of us are in the West and some in the East and some Central. You don't get to know people necessarily across the country. And I think it's just so much fun to get to know each other because we really do have so much in common. And yet we're also kind of fascinating people, to tell you the truth. We have people, of course, who have immigrated here from faraway places. We have converts who have come from different faiths and all different sorts of backgrounds and found their way here through different paths. And then we have, you know, the kids who've just grown up in the church and have great stories. And so I love getting together, and I just feel like this is our contribution tonight. We're all together. We're getting to know another everyday Orthodox Christian. This is us building up the body of Christ together. So thank you for joining us and doing this with us again tonight, and join us every Sunday night because it's actually a lot of fun. But you're always invited to call in and join the conversation. The number is 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. And Matushka Trudy Richter is here producing the program tonight. She's answering your calls. So if you call in with a question, Matushka Trudy will patch you through and you can ask our guest and speak with both of us tonight. Now, our guest is a friend of mine and actually someone who is a co-author on a recent book that came out with me, co-author with me on a recent book that came out, I should say. Elise Photini is an author and a beautiful way coach. She's a registered nurse, and she's raising her littles, who are now teenagers and getting bigger, on the dry living desert side of the Pacific Northwest. I don't know if you guys know this, but the Pacific Northwest does actually have a desert side, and it's totally different from what you're picturing when you think Seattle. But so she's up there as a single mom, working as a home health geriatric nurse. She creates time to write and to speak between, you know, horse shows with her girls and Boy Scout events with her son. And when she gets a chance, she does not mind spending a little time gardening in silence. And I can absolutely understand that. But so I'm excited for all of us to get to know Elise tonight. So Elise, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
Oh, we're excited to have you. I am, especially because I feel like you and I have known each other for a long time, but really mostly online. We really only have met in person probably once, I think. But I feel like I've known you forever. It's so funny. I kind of love that. Kind of love how the internet works. But now I get a chance to hear your whole story. So starting at the beginning, Elise, where were you born? Like, where does your story begin?
Oh, it's a good place to start. I actually am Canadian. So I was born in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada, on the island of Vancouver.
Oh, that's so beautiful. You were born in one of the most beautiful places on earth.
Yes.
That's amazing. Yes. Did you grow up there, or did your family move away soon, or what was that?
Yeah, when I was about 2, we moved here to the Walla Walla Valley in the Pacific Northwest. And as you said in my intro, it's the dry side. And so we're right between sagebrush desert and the Blue Mountains. So we have orchards, and now we have vineyards. It's wine country these days. When I was growing up, it was just wheat fields and apple orchards. So it's an agricultural town with 3 different colleges and universities, and just a really great place. I joke that I've been trying to leave my hometown for a couple decades and have finally given up. So I'm here.
Well, Well, there you go. There you go. But I do think it does have a reputation for being a nice place to live. So I can see how you would get kind of stuck there because it does seem like a great place. But what was your childhood like? What were you like? Were you in a small school or a big school, or was it like when you say it was agricultural? Does that mean you were in a really small town at the time?
Well, I didn't even know what Walla Walla was back then. Probably around 20,000 people. We went through the whole um, downtown dying period before everything reinvigorated with vineyards coming to town in the last 10 or 20 years. But for me, I was raised Seventh-day Adventist. There's a Seventh-day Adventist university here. So I was raised as pretty fundamental Seventh-day Adventist, pretty extra conservative Seventh-day Adventist, I'd have to say. And in a pretty chaotic childhood, the bright moments that I clung to were that we were out of town about 6 or 7 miles, and I loved growing up in the middle of a wheat field. So it was farming and wheat fields all around. I had horses as a teenager. I was happiest outside on my own, hiking somewhere or running with my horses, and half killing myself half the time.
Oh, wow.
And that was my happy place.
Oh, that's beautiful. I grew up just outside of a Seventh-day Adventist town. Pacific Union College is down in Napa
Yep.
Valley, and I was just right outside of there. So actually, like, we're both from Seventh-day Adventist university towns, which it's
Yes.
funny because it sounds like, oh, well, no, that's a thing. Like, the grocery stores
Oh, it's
don't
a
sell
thing.
animal products. Like, it's a thing.
That's
And I've
right.
always been kind of fascinated because, I had a lot of friends who were Seventh-day Adventist, and they always said being a vegetarian was not actually part of the faith. It was just a lifestyle that was like adjacent to it. Is that like there's a lot of that though, right? There are a lot of different things that are really different about Seventh-day Adventist communities.
Yeah,
And I
it's
imagine our
kind
audience
of,
probably doesn't know. So tell them about it a little bit.
yes. I've met amazingly, and I'm sure some of our audience will probably know someone. It's amazing the numbers of Seventh-day Adventists that have converted to Orthodoxy because there's a real heart for the truth. And growing up, of course, I believed what my parents told me was the truth. But there was a lot of things about being a Seventh-day Adventist that were traditional without us ever using that hated or feared, probably would be the more accurate term, tradition. So that's what you're mentioning when you mention vegetarianism. There's a lot of things like that have lost some of their importance to today's, Seventh-day Adventists, but in my family was still very, very important. My mom's came from her dad was German, and her mom was actually Ukrainian. They converted to Seventh-day Adventism before she was born and took it like lock, stock, and barrel. Everything about it. They just took it really to heart and became, super fundamentalist. So no jewelry was really important, very modest dressing. And they were sort of on the fringes of it in a way that, so people who grew up Adventist do relate to a lot of what I grew up with, but my parents kind of took it to the extreme.
Gotcha. Yeah, I remember that. No jewelry, no animal products. And then just
No
and of
makeup.
course the Sabbath, worshiping on Saturday instead of on Sunday, which is always, I have a friend who was raised Seventh-day Adventist, and her parents were always kind of convinced that someday, everybody was going to try to force everyone to worship on Sunday, which is so amazing because if you're not Seventh-day Adventist, like you just can't imagine a world in which anyone would worry about when Seventh-day Adventists are. But it's interesting, right? Because over the years, there's persecution, and we come out of it with all of these concerns and all of these preoccupations. But okay, wow. Yeah. And then I also had friends who posed as Seventh-day Adventists, and they had to like not drink in public and stuff. And it was really, it was kind of, it was very interesting. But so Seventh-day Adventism in general is, at least in my experience, was pretty conservative. So your family must have been very conservative. Were you in like a regular public school, or did you have a Seventh-day Adventist school?
No, so I didn't get any schooling. I was quote unquote homeschooled is how I described it. But we didn't get any formal books or anything until I was in 6th grade. So I self-taught myself to read, and eventually did get a couple years of schooling, went to 7th grade, 8th grade, and 9th grade, and dropped out because of the chaos at home. So I got very little schooling formally. My parents were very afraid of a lot of the things actually that are going around now. There's still topics in super conservative circles of, indoctrination or being taught the wrong thing in school. Even they even considered our church schools too liberal, and so kept us home.
Wow. Well, and that's, that's one of the pitfalls of homeschooling, right? Like so many homeschoolers
Right.
are doing such a beautiful job and giving their
Absolutely.
kids these beautiful educations. And then, but that's always sort of the fear is that, well, what about the
Right.
kids who slip through the cracks and we don't realize it, but they're not really being schooled? And that is
Right.
a scary thing. But I mean, obviously, you've come back from it beautifully. You're a published
Right.
author who didn't really get to go to school. I mean, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
That's
Thank you.
a testament
Yeah.
to the ability to teach yourself. Like, I actually think we have maybe more of that than we give ourselves credit for. We don't think kids can teach themselves, but it is really impressive.
Yeah,
it
was the original unschooling. The original unschooling before that was a thing. That was what I thought.
Right.
And
That's right.
and we were talking before we went on the air about how we can look back now and see how inside every difficult, traumatic, stressful thing there has been a gift that I've taken forward, and that without question, my tenacity to keep learning despite having to overcome some of those early building blocks that were missed, has given me, a determination that, and I can go through anything. I mean, because there's just got to be a way. Just because somebody didn't hand it to me doesn't mean there's not a way.
That's right. Well, and you think about, people historically, girls weren't allowed to go to school. And I think about, I knew a woman who was born in 1901 and she was Montenegrin, and her little brother taught her how to read on the side, right? Like using chalk on the street, right? Like it is amazing, the human desire for knowledge and our tenacity to go get it. And it's beautiful. But so what did you do? Like when you dropped out of school, as you said, like the home was chaotic, right? By the way, did you have siblings? How many of you were there?
I did. I have a younger brother, 2 years younger than me. And then my sisters are 14 and 15 years older than me. Same mom and dad, but there were 4 of us. So I kind of tagged along as my sisters went through college, and through one of my sisters went to medical school when I was 5 or 6 years old. So I was around education a lot. I was just kind of the extra kids at the end of the line. You can catch up, kind of a feeling. But I was.
Were the older kids at schools? Like, were the older kids in traditional schools? So it was like by the time it came to you,
they were a combination of homeschooling curriculum, like a formal homeschooling curriculum, and then some formal schooling, and then they did go to high school. So me dropping out of high school wasn't part of my parents' plan.
Right.
Needless to say.
Well, yeah, you've got a sister in medical school and you've dropped out. Right. It is a little, it's differing outcomes to be fair. But, so what did you do when you dropped out? What did you do? Where did you stay with your parents or did you head out?
No, I headed out. I have had a fire in my belly to solve the chaos that I was raised with ever since I can remember. And I wanted not just the technical truth, but I wanted a truth that was going to work, that was going to change my life. And I was so frustrated, even as a teenager, aware of the frustration I had with the hypocrisy that I saw in Seventh-day Adventism, the overimportance on those traditions we couldn't call tradition, and the frustration with, everything had to fit in the right box, otherwise it wasn't correct. And I was just really frustrated. But the real reason I dropped out was ongoing chaos with my mom. And so I ended up getting married to leave home. Mm-hmm. So I got married at 19 and had my first daughter when I was just 19 as well.
I mean, that's the way out, right? That's the ticket out. And I think it's so common. That's how my mom ended up getting married, to tell you the truth. Like same age too, 19 years old. And it was like, I'll tell you what, if I were a mom, if I were a wife, I wouldn't be dealing with any of this. you head out. So I'm just going to do the math myself here and say, let's see, you got married at 19 and you're a single mom now. So I'm going to assume this was not a match made in heaven and maybe not the choice you would have made for yourself today.
That's right.
But generally speaking, how did those years go? And were you home with your daughter? Were you working? Like what ends up happening? What went on in those years?
So what I wanted to do, what my vision was to, recreate what I had missed. But when I didn't have anything to draw on to do that with. So it was just, trying to make it up as I went. And there was a lot of depression, a lot of PTSD from the chaos I went through as a kid, and just trying to make something work. And I really fell on my face for my entire 20s. The marriage ended. I actually lost custody of my daughter when she was just 3 years old, which was, to me at the time, felt like the end of my life. Like I'd failed absolutely everything. That's how I felt at that time. But the search, that fire in my belly to still find the healing, and, you know, Christ was very real to me, even though I didn't know what he could do for me yet. I could never completely abandon God or hope, but at the same time, I felt like a complete failure by the end of my 20s.
Well, it's so hard, right? You know, and I feel like, I don't know, I feel like a lot of us go into our 20s feeling like we have a real clear project and a real clear goal, and by golly, we're going to accomplish it. And when you can't accomplish it, you know, and maybe this is necessary. Maybe we need to be humbled like that, you know, maybe so, but that's hard. That's hard. Those are very hard years. So, okay, so you end up, you're divorced. What next? Where'd you go?
So then in my 30s is where God and I really started the big argument.
That's beautifully put. I love that.
Yeah, I was absolutely convinced that I had committed some unpardonable sin and God had abandoned me, and even trying anymore was pointless. So I actually got married again, and that failed again in my early 30s. And after that failed, I took off. I literally ran away from the Pacific Northwest. I ended up in Las Vegas, of all places. And the short version is I met my girl's dad on a Greyhound bus. You know, Saint Photini calling to me is because I share a lot with her.
5 husbands, and this one is not your husband. Today's the Sunday of the Samaritan woman. I love that.
Very, very literally for me, that was my experience. I ended up homeless with this guy on the streets. And one day I'll be writing more of that whole story, because I was just done with it. I was like, well, if the church and trying to be good, or any church and trying to be good, isn't going to heal some of this stuff, then why am I even trying? I was just really at the end of my rope, but God wasn't done with me yet.
So this sounds like a ridiculous question, but how often do we have someone who can answer this question on Everyday Orthodox, right? What was it like? What is that? Tell me about that experience of being homeless, because I think, especially when a young woman has problems like that with her mother and has struggled with her mom, it really does get to be really difficult, right? Because you're trying to figure out how to be such a great mom, and you don't have an example for it, and you don't quite know and you're not really mature enough to do it yet anyway. And you've been going through all of this upheaval. I mean, I can easily see where at a certain point it's like, forget it. Like, this isn't, none of it's working anyway, I give, right? But what is that? Because the thing about being homeless is that the fight out of it is so hard. Because, you know what I mean? Everything works against you. Like, people can say, like, oh, go get a job. And it's like, well, if you don't have a place to shower, like, how are you going to show up for work clean and ready every day, right? Like, there are just so many little practical things that get in the way there. So, if you don't mind telling me a little bit about your experience with homelessness and just sort of where that was to help us understand what that's like, and then how you ended up, I guess, getting out of it.
So the man I was with, was kind of an expert in petty crime. So he supported us by a lot of stealing from stores. He would steal the product and then return it for cash, and that would get us another night in a hotel. And then we'd have to check out of the hotel and wander around whatever city we were in until he got another, whatever it could be managed that day for another night in a hotel. So one of the titles I've tossed around for the memoir of those days, I've tossed around like 999 nights in a hotel, because it was 3 years, 99 different hotel rooms.
Wow. 3 years.
3 years.
Oh my goodness.
And it was so, it was a dual experience of, this finally feels at least weirdly honest to what I've experienced. There's not a disconnect between my outside life and my inside life. It's all crap. Forgive my language. So there was
That's fascinating.
recognition that finally I could just be as messed up as I felt on the inside on the outside.
You know what? There's something beautiful about that, isn't there? I mean, it's
weirdly,
awful.
yes.
It's awful,
Yes.
but there is something weirdly beautiful about that feeling of like, I'm not faking it. I'm not pretending.
Right.
I'm not, there's no disconnect happening anymore.
Right.
Here we are, and this is honest, and this is where I am.
And I've heard it from other, people who struggle with mental illness and trauma. We all wish that we had some scars to point to because, putting that mask on is kind of easy. And it's also excruciating at the same time. So there was that experience that I was having with kind of backwards honesty. But then the lack of having any safe place to land at all, the lack of knowing who I could trust, and then learning that I could trust myself less and less. I stopped trying to leave him after 7 or 8 times because it was a very emotionally addictive relationship. Thank God we were spared any drugs or alcohol or those kinds of things to add to the picture, but it was definitely an emotionally addictive situation. The weird thing is that he was mentally ill himself, and so I could see clearly his struggle. And I kept hoping, as many women do in the situation, that he would change. The promises would come and we'll make it different. And I would try whatever I could, threaten or cajole or, how could I make this better too? And we just never could. The spiritual piece of the journey, though, was that just a few months before I had run away and given up on everything, I had become a catechumen in the Orthodox Church here in Walla Walla.
Oh, really?
So the running was really running from God, because by then I knew where the power was. I knew where the solution was, and I still, way down deep in my soul, believed it wasn't really for me, that I was really beyond rescue.
That maybe you didn't deserve it. Maybe you didn't. Yeah. It was too late. Do you feel like, I know often people will talk about this problem of when you grow up with someone who is struggling or mentally ill or has, crazy dynamics or whatever it is, that you go as a young adult, you go out and you find that same problem, but this time you're going to fix it. And it's like, I couldn't fix it at home, so now I'm going to fix it here. Okay, I can't fix it here, I'm going to fix it there. And you're just, you almost literally seek out the same kind of problem, and you don't know you're doing it, of course. You have everything's completely different now. But do you think that's kind of the dynamic that was going on there?
That was definitely part of the dynamic. I wished more than anything to have the honesty of how much pain I was in and someone else was in to be met and seen and fixed without spackling over it with whitewash or a Band-Aid or, any hypocrisy. I wanted to fix it, and I wanted to be healed. And during those times, I felt like, all the good stuff I had seen and all the truth that I had been exposed to, even the experiences of becoming a catechumen and experiencing liturgy or Vespers. I mean, I had gone to Pascha and was blown away. I still felt like I was too far gone, that was for other people who could somehow connect those dots in their heart and not for me.
So when you talk about like this feeling of kind of wanting to be seen in all of the pain and all of the difficulty, and to just sort of be able to be honestly sitting there without things being whitewashed or covered over or pushed past, like what would that have looked like to you if someone were to come up and encounter you? Like if you and I were going out to lunch, is there something I could have said or done that would have really helped? Like, would it help to just sit and listen to you and say, that sounds horrible? Or what would help in that state? Or is it like a state where it can't be helped?
Well, my answer is probably going to surprise and not surprise you at the same time. Nothing short of my running all the way to the end of my rope was really going to reach me in that place. Yeah. I had to run to the end of my rope and burn all my bridges and be rescued only and exclusively by God in order to turn around and come home. There was, And I thank God every time I meet somebody who didn't have to run to the extreme like I did, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone else. The gift of having gone through that, though, is that the bedrock of my faith is now so strong that many things can be shaken, but that can't be in my life. So I certainly, I so wish sometimes in talking to people who are despairing, it's like, can I just download those 3 years in your head? I don't want you to go through them. I just want you to know what I know. Like, it was awful and it was real. And the rescue was also real. You don't have to go through, everybody doesn't have to go through it, thank God. But really, truly, I had to run to the end of myself.
It's always interesting to me. Sometimes, when I speak to parents, a lot of times there's this concern, what's going to happen to these kids? They're going to go through difficult things.
Yes.
And it's like, it really is such a mixed blessing because
Yes.
when we go through difficult things and we reach out to God and he lifts us up, you're right. It's an indelible mark, right? It's something you'll never forget. You might walk away from it. I wouldn't say you would never walk away from it,
Right.
but you'll always know it was there and you'll always know it was true. And that can be such a transformative thing. And it doesn't have to be homelessness. It doesn't have to be whatever, drug addiction or alcohol or whatever.
Right.
It can be grief. It can be whatever. But there's something that, like, whatever it takes for you to be humbled, like you're going to have to be humbled to be able to get that. And so what was the rescue? Well, actually, you know what? We have to take a short break. So this is actually probably the perfect cliffhanger moment, right? So we'll take a short break and then we're going to be right back with Elise Photini and we're going to find out, what is the rescue? Like, what is it that God did that transformed things for her and has changed everything since? And if you want to call in, you're welcome to do it. 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. We'll be right back.
Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Davis will be back in a moment. Give Elisa and her guest a call at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO.
No end of books these days offer us techniques for self-improvement. But in the newest release from the Ancient Faith store, Gratitude in Life's Trenches, Robin Phillips takes a different tack. He shows us that God meets us where we are, in the pain and heartache of the present moment. Instead of looking for a way to escape from hardship, we can cultivate an attitude of gratitude, peace, and self-acceptance that will transform our experience of suffering. Drawing on his own experiences and his work as a consultant in the behavioral health industry, as well as stories of saints and sufferers, teachings of the fathers, and recent discoveries in neuroscience, Phillips shows us that the journey to personal well-being is one we can all travel, regardless of the hardships we may face. To find this book and others like it, you can go to store.ancientfaith.com. Again, that is store.ancientfaith.com.
We're back with Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Davis. Do you have a question for Elisa and today's guest? Call in now at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. Here again is Elisa.
Welcome back to Everyday Orthodox. We're here tonight with Elise Photini, and we've been talking about how she has, in her 20s, and then right in the beginning of her 30s, she's going through these really difficult years. And then there's this way in which God rescued her. And so, Elise, tell me a little bit about that. So you'd been, 999 nights in a hotel, or in various different hotels, which
Various
is really
hotels, yes.
Yeah, which is the thing, right? Living in one hotel would be one thing, but a different place every night is a crazy sort of existence. What changes? What happens? What breaks you out of it?
So we're in Clearwater, Florida. So these crazy existences happened all over the U.S. And because the guy I was with would get scared of wherever he was at and have to go to a different town. So we ended up in Florida at one point. Michaela, my second daughter, was just 9 months old, and I couldn't sleep one night. So I got up and turned the TV on in our tiny little hotel room, and was flicking through the channels, and I always made sure to skip TBN. Do you know what TBN is?
It's a religious channel, right?
It's a religious channel, but it's
Yeah.
very, very out there religious channel. So I always made sure to skip it because it was never helpful or encouraging, no matter
It's like Hellfire
no matter
and Brimstone kind of religious channel.
No, more like Pentecostal and speaking in
Okay.
tongues and send us all
Benny
your money
Hinn
kind.
and yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
I remember them.
So I'm scooting past it, but it's an old TV, so it's the kind that has to come on for a minute at every channel before it can go past.
Remember those? The tube has to warm up. And
Yes. And so this view of rolling hills and tiny little chapels with icons of the Theotokos on them. And I'm like, what is that doing on that channel? But I've already flipped like 4 past by the time I think this through.
Right.
And so I go back to find it. It was actually a documentary on the life of St. Herman of Alaska.
Oh, wow.
And I sat there with my jaw on the floor and tears streaming down my face and told God, I don't know if this was out loud or not because it was just so real at the moment. I told God, I'm like, but I can't. It's too late. I can't go home. And home meaning, home to God, home to church.
Isn't that beautiful? I mean, you hadn't spent that much time in the church.
Very little.
And yet it was home and you knew it. That's amazing.
Yeah. And the instant response was, it's never too late. And what happened was that what came to mind immediately following that conversation with God was I started remembering portions of the liturgy. And I recalled sitting with my parish priest and him telling me about the Jesus prayer. And when I asked the next question, which was, so what do I do now? Because now I felt this change in my heart and I'm stuck here I was pregnant again with my second daughter with this guy, and I'm in a hotel room in Florida, and I've burned every bridge. Like, people have tried to buy me plane tickets home and bus tickets, and I've been in shelters, domestic violence shelters. I've literally burned so many bridges. And the only answer that came back to what now is just pray. So I started praying the Jesus prayer again after having not prayed at all. No, none of those the conversations hadn't been happening, or Jesus prayer, or any kind of prayer hadn't been happening those whole 3 years. And I started praying the Jesus prayer. And what began to change is that I would pray the Jesus prayer instead of arguing with the guy I was with or trying to plan my escape. All I did was just say the Jesus prayer. And I didn't know it because I barely had any exposure to the church at all. I had no idea what I was doing except just repeating the Jesus prayer. But I would walk with Michaela in the stroller up and down the city streets, waiting for the guy to get whatever money for the next night, and just pray and pray and pray and pray. And at first, I was expecting, okay, if I'm supposed to pray, you're supposed to rescue me tomorrow. Would be nice.
Right. Exactly. I prayed for 3 hours. Let's go.
Let's go. And the days would go by, and actually weeks and then months went by. The process of me coming home started when she was 9 months old, and we weren't rescued until she was 13 and a half months old, and Nina was 7 days old. And yeah, it couldn't have ever. I couldn't have planned it. I wouldn't have planned it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and there is a certain special feeling about being very pregnant and feeling like, I have no way out. I could not be more stuck than I am right now. And I don't know if that's the hormones or if it's just also that sense that, like, okay, now there's going to be another baby born into this mess. And that, this whole situation has just gotten that, exponentially bigger as soon as this happens. Yeah. And it just, how amazing. So, but you kept praying that whole time, even though the solution wasn't appearing. Were you gaining some solace out of just the prayer itself?
Absolutely. And in looking back now, when I get discouraged and I've hit walls, of course, as everybody does since then, since being rescued, I look back to that moment and treasure it. The one whole body memory that I have is walking hugely pregnant. I'm overdue by 6 or 7 days, and I'm walking up and down the Mills Mall. We're up in the Chicago area now. And I'm walking up and down the Mills Mall, hoping and praying that I go into labor soon and that we're somehow rescued and I can leave, and having no clue about how any of that's going to happen, but I'm praying. And what was so amazing is that I'm praying the Jesus prayer in a way that I've learned since is the way monks have learned to do it, with the breath in and the breath out. I had no idea that was a thing, but I just did it while I was walking. And every time I get to a wall now, that's the bedrock of my salvation. If I can stay connected and at a level of peace that I don't think I've experienced since then. I mean, now I know more options. And then, I was like literally completely out of any option. And all I could do was breathe the Jesus prayer. And there was a sense of complete okayness in that moment. I mean, I didn't even know to call it peace. I knew I was okay, as crazy as it was.
Isn't that just the most fascinating thing that you receive that peace? I mean, it's clearly a gift of God, right? It has to be, because you're in such a absolutely not a peaceful situation at all, and everything's uncertain and everything's unsure. And now you're like solid and comfortable, and you're everything's going to be okay tomorrow, and yet you don't have that same peace. Like, it's so fascinating to me and so beautiful when God gives us that gift. You really just have to be completely humbled to receive it somehow. Yeah. Oh, that's amazing.
And having experienced it, I can, go back to it. I know that it's a choice I have today that I didn't have before I was given that gift.
Well, and the interesting thing is you don't have to have it all the time, right? No. Like, you're not mad at God that he isn't giving it to you now. It's like you can just enter into that memory, and you know that it's like Pascha, right? Like, oh, Pascha's over, but there will be another Pascha next year. Like, you just know that that's an eternal thing, and you'll come in and out of it as needed. But wow, that's neat. So what was the rescue? What happens?
So we're driving down the road in Kansas, and all these 3 years, he had never been arrested. And I turn around in the seat. He's driving. I turn around the seat because Michaela loved the car seat and she could travel forever. Nina popped out, hating every second of it. And by day 3, she'd screamed our ears down.
Like, oh no, honey, we live a nomadic life. This is not okay.
This is not going to work for this child in any way, shape, or form. And I turn around to try and console her and give her a pacifier, and I see the light flashing behind us. And I know it's over.
Wow.
Because we're driving in a stolen vehicle, and he stole the vehicle, and we're driving in a stolen vehicle. And I start praying the Jesus prayer immediately and start bawling my eyes out. He thinks it's because I'm upset, and I don't care what he thinks at that time, because I know my door is opening. And I'm so relieved and terrified at the same time, because there's no guarantee that I'm walking away from this just because he's the one who's driving the car he stole,
Yep.
And so he initially gets out and can't talk his way out of it, so jumps back in the car and starts running with us in the car. No. And I'm praying and praying and praying and just want it to be over. And then I knew what I had to tell him. So I turned to him and I said, if you ever loved us, you'll stop running and get out and face it. And I have to say it like 3 times for him to hear me. He'd been in prison before and was very terrified to go back for, logical reasons, but it was the only choice at that point. And so he did. He pulled the car over. My girls did not see him. I prayed that they wouldn't be able to, have that memory, even as tiny as they were in their minds. They didn't see him, but they pulled him over and got him out at gunpoint and arrested him. And I'm just terrified and relieved and amazed all at the same time. They keep us there on the side of the road for a couple hours and search the vehicle. at one point, the sergeant comes over to me and says, I know you know more about him than you're telling us, but you have babies and you need to go home. I'm just like, what? Yes, but what? You just said that.
Oh, thank God. Oh, thank God.
He literally puts us, we're in the middle of a turnpike, like, I don't know, 60 miles away from some town in Kansas. And he puts us in the car. The girl's dad hands me the last money in his wallet, which is just enough for a next hotel room. And the police sergeant, drives us back to the nearest town and puts us in a hotel for the night.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. But I mean, on the one hand, that's, okay, here's money for a hotel. Great. That's one night.
Yeah.
Did you sleep that night?
Not at first. And the struggle was immediately, how do I get food for the babies? And I'm nursing Nina, but Michaela needs food. And thank God it was a hotel that had a breakfast thing so I could get her some food. I mean, I had zero money at that point. I called shelters. There was no shelter space available. That happened repeatedly through those 3 years and didn't surprise me. I did manage to get a hold through a collect call. Do they still have them now? Through a collect call from the hotel phone. I didn't even have a cell phone. I managed to get a hold of my mom, and she flew us back out to Walla Walla the next day.
Glory to God. It is an interesting thing. So often, we can come from such dysfunctional family situations, but in the end, if they can just come through for us this one time, right? And it's so hard because the truth is that people who have really functional, solid families very rarely go through these things because they have someone they can call. I talk to my kids about that sometimes and just say, like, you have this huge extended family. And you'll never be homeless because there are so many people who will lift you up and give you another chance. And it's just not like that for everyone. And thank God that in that moment, it was for you.
Yeah.
And there she was. So what ends up happening? You flew back to Walla Walla?
The journey, the rebuilding after that many years of being out of society was really, really difficult. It took me months to stop communicating with this guy. He actually had another psychotic break in prison, and we lost all contact with him since then. But it took me months to, sort of pull out the I don't know. I imagine I have a picture of enmeshment, kind of like a weed kind of wrapping around your heart. Took a long time to pull all those tentacles off and know for sure that I need to go in another direction. But all I did for year was go to services and take care of my babies. And thank God I had barely just enough, welfare to do that. And I had somebody who helped me get into a tiny little apartment. And I had a friend of my mom's give me a car to drive. And that's all I did was show up at service. It was really funny in retrospect. I showed up at service the very next Sunday for liturgy, and everybody's like, oh, your baby's so tiny. We never see babies this tiny. And I didn't realize for months and months and months, it was because usually moms stay home for the 40 days. And I went like, she's a week old. I'm in church.
You're like, I'm here. But you know what?
I'm here.
Thank God. And thank God nobody stood at the door and wagged their finger at you and sent you away.
Thank God.
Because, I think about that a lot. I have a good friend who would come to services, and she was a mess, right? But she was like wearing jeans and bright red lipstick and coming in, putting on her lipstick. But, and it's like, you can't do that because of communion. But she doesn't know that, right? But like, if you called her out, she would have walked off and maybe never never come back, right? Like, thank God nobody said to you, hey, you're doing it wrong. Yeah. Just show up and they're delighted and, and they maybe can't help but say, wow, I never see a 1-week-old baby in church.
Thank God it was over my head at the time. I might have been offended, but no. And it was like a baby learning to walk again. I had to learn how to not lie. I had to learn how to not shoplift when I was in the grocery store. I had to learn how to, it was really wobbly. And at the same time, there was so much grace. I remember I had told everybody that I had married the guy because it was too embarrassing to say that I was with somebody that I had not been married to. And the priest said,
But thank God you hadn't.
you know,
I
if
mean,
you're going to
that'd be
get
even more
baptized, you're going to, right. If you're going to get baptized, you're going to have to start telling the truth.
Oh no.
Yeah, that's true. I guess that is true. And so I was going around apologizing to everybody, you know, and everybody was so kind and loving in the midst of all of that, you know, and yeah, it hasn't, you know, since then, I don't know what we're doing on time, but since then it has not been a straight line. I still have taken detours, but I've never had to take nearly that big of a detour. And I never will have to, because, you know, my faith and my knowledge of God loving me and leading me forward. In fact, I'm about to put something up on my website and social media, because just this last week, I was approved for my first mortgage ever in my life.
Elise, congratulations.
I know.
You're going to own your house. Look at you.
Yes.
Well, you're a nurse now. I mean,
yes.
you've come a long way.
I'm working and supporting my kids, and I'm off welfare. I thought those three things, being off welfare and working and supporting my own family fully and owning my own home, I thought were pipe dreams for so many years. Yeah. And, you know, it doesn't mean that if God hadn't given me those things, I wouldn't be fully rescued, but those were desires of my heart. Those were deep desires of my heart. And to have been brought all this way, and then to have my kids have experienced this with me, this coming out of nothing, and they know what it's like to not have a washer and dryer in our house and have to go to the laundromat, and then to go from a tiny little basement apartment to, you know, a nicer rental, and then to now having made it through school. And I just love being a productive member of society. It's a genuineness that I never would have experienced had I not kind of run to the end of my rope.
That's amazing. That's just so beautiful. And now you're a published author. Thank you very much.
Yes.
I love this even more. You know, I had no idea about, I knew you'd been through all kinds of hard things, and I knew why you loved Saint Photini, but I did not know, I mean, all the way back to no formal schooling. Hello. Like, Elise, it's wonderful. It's really beautiful. And it's wonderful to see what beautiful things God has done in your life. But I will also say it's beautiful to see what wonderful things you have done in your life.
Thank you.
And you have stood up and done some pretty amazing things, frankly. So tell us, so just to inform our readers, you know, so Summer Kennard runs Park End Books, and I've interviewed her on this program, and she's brilliant. She's so neat. She has autism. She has 4 kids with autism. So she has this like amazing, fascinating, different perspective on the world that like, she'll say something and you'll be like, wow, how have I never seen it that way? That's so obviously true. And also she's theologically brilliant, and she wrote Of Such is the Kingdom. And so she came up with this one day, you know, she's just like, hey, we need a book for single moms. We need a book about single mother saints. Mm-hmm. And she approached me, and I was like, I'm in the middle of a divorce, and I'm not going to write anything about anything. I'm not going to tell anything. Because it's weird in the Orthodox world to get divorced, because, you know, we Orthodox are very good at putting forth the people who have sort of a perfect looking life. And, you know, I've got my 4 kids, and 3 of them are priests, and the other one's a presbytera, and woohoo. And, you know, and that's beautiful. And there are families like that, and it's wonderful. But there are also a bunch of broken families and a bunch of people whose stories aren't as pat.
Not a straight line.
That aren't straight lines, right? But they're still beautiful stories, and in some ways maybe even more inspiring, because you know, it's interesting for a story to go through the dark places. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, so I was not sure what to do. And she said, oh, can you come and write? And I was like, eh. And she goes, well, I want you to write about St. Helen. And I was like, oh, crap. Well, then I have to do it. Because I knew St. Helen had been calling to me. How did you end up writing for Summer for this book?
Very similarly. In fact, she's told me recently that St. Sophia and her 3 daughters wasn't even on her original list. So she had the book pretty much finished, and she'd asked all the rest of you guys to contribute and had it all in process, when she just kept getting this thought that I needed to write St. Sophia. She and I had known each other for several years in a similar way that you and I had known each other on Facebook and various places and online. And so she asked me to write about St. Sophia, and I immediately said no because I've always wanted to write. I love writing. I consider writing my first language. Words are so important to me, and I've written in all kinds of different various career positions or, personal projects and things. And I wanted to write more about my experience with the saints, but not Saint Sophia. I'm like, her children were martyred. Why would I want to get to know her better?
Right.
That
is such a hard one. Oh my gosh.
I offered her all these other suggestions, and she's like, nope. And she didn't tell me at the time, nope, God told me you had to write about Saint Sophia.
But Summer's really close to God, so Summer's not messing around. It's like there's certain holy people who tell you things, and it's like, oh, she got that in prayer. Watch out.
Yeah.
Good luck getting away from that, Jonah.
Yeah. That's exactly what it was.
Wow, I love that. So you did get to know Saint Sophia at the urging of Summer. And I think, honestly, I'm with you. Like if she had said Saint Sophia, I would have been like, no, thank you. Yeah. Like that just, it's so painful to even, spend 15 minutes thinking about Saint Sophia because of course and we're kind of assuming our audience knows this, but just so you guys know, Saint Sophia watched her 3 children brutally tortured and martyred in front of our eyes. Mm-hmm. And then she died of grief. And it's just like, that's just a story. Like if you're a mom, especially if you're a mom who's ever lost a child in any way, whether custody wise or through death or whatever, like that's a thing you don't want to touch. That's a very tender spot. Right. You don't want to touch. Right. So how did you do it?
Well, it was, of course, perfect timing because God knew that I needed to know Saint Sophia more. It was Lent last year, and my son's father, the part of the story that we didn't get to was that I did get married in a church, and then that marriage sadly ended. And so now I have 3 little ones at home. My son's father hadn't been to see him in over 7 years and was back in the picture during that Lent, just as I was needing to get to know Saint Sophia. So I was wrestling with how to keep my children safe. What even does it mean to keep our children safe or to try to keep our children safe? And what if I'm not able to be there to protect them and to raise them and to guide them? Like, what if somebody else has all this influence, and can I trust this influence? And is it, and there's no easy answers in our real world. And I certainly didn't expect to find them with Saint Sophia, but getting to know her and working on writing this was an incredible experience of realizing that God loves my kids more than I do. For real. It's not just a saying. And is bringing them what they need. When I pray that prayer, I don't remember whether it was a saint or a priest or something, but I had heard years ago of a father who had gone up to his children's bedroom every single night and prayed that God would bring them what they needed, not what he thought they needed. It just gives me chills even to say it in passing because it's such a surrender. Such a surrender.
It is.
And when my heart is all caught up with my own fears and readings of situations, it was so easy for me to assume I know what they need more than God does. It's just not true. So getting to know Saint Sophia and watching her walk through the martyrdom of her children, what struck so deeply to me was that she didn't prep them for those trials. I imagined from my Protestant upbringing that, they were rehearsing their defense of their Christianity.
Apologetics classes.
The proof text. Yes, proof text. And,
oh my gosh, I've never thought about that. Oh, you're so right.
Instead,
oh, Lord have mercy.
Christ.
Yeah.
And she had the beauty and the simpleness and the depth of her faith that was obvious to everyone, to the point in which the emperor was offended and had to, make sure it was real and not hypocrisy. And then her only advice to her children was just to answer truthfully. And it wasn't a hidden meaning. It was just the real thing. It was the real deal. And I realized that, I could never prepare my children for everything that God might lead them through. And that was okay, because God was the one leading them, not me.
Oh, that's beautiful. Isn't that amazing? It's a neat thing about this book. We should say the title of this book is The Grace of Being There, Single Mother Saints in Our Lives. And it's by Park End Books, and I put up the link on the Everyday Orthodox page. But, it's really neat because I, too, like my chapter also was very much about, it's wrestling with this problem of sending your kids out. And for single mothers, it's a little different because you feel like you don't have any control because there's this other parent and there are custody laws and other people are going to be able to raise your kid part of the time. And it just seems crazy. And you get worried about like what's going to happen and what are these influences and all of this. And my chapter is about Saint Helena. And it was very much the same thing. Constantine, when he was young, her husband divorced her, and Constantine actually went like on tour with Diocletian for a while and was like following his uncle Diocletian around while he was persecuting Christians. And it's like, it is so helpful to have these saints. And I really think before I was divorced, this would have helped me too, because it's not just single moms in custody situations who worry about it, right? Like, who is influencing our kids? How do you raise your child in such a way? And I think even about your children, your parents and your childhood, right? Like, how do you raise your Christian child in a way that you can send them out into the world and not be afraid that they're not going to be okay? They're going to be influenced. They're going to be what? And it's like, we look to the saints. We look to Saint Sophia, we look to Saint Helena, we look to a whole bunch of saints, and we recognize that, you do the best you can and God fills in the rest. And that's it. There's nothing else to it. There's no other magic.
Literally. Yeah.
Oh. Yeah. Well, I love your chapter in the book, frankly.
Thank you. And
I love the book.
Yes, I love reading how all 7 of us, have all come through these different experiences with very similar themes. I think God is so kind to be willing to teach us each individually. I imagine he must get tired of repeating himself sometimes.
It is amazing.
I told them already.
Right. It's amazing. It's the same lesson for everyone, but it's got to be individualized absolutely every time. But thank God he has endless mercy. And Elise, thank you so much for coming on the program tonight. This has been a delight. And I have no doubt that there are a million people hundreds of people listening who have just been so inspired and delighted to get to know you. So Elise, thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you to our audience. Thank you for joining us tonight. And come back next Sunday night. We'll have another Everyday Orthodox Christian for you to meet. Good night. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight for Everyday Orthodox. Father Evan, you're up next. Are you ready?
I think so. I always say this time of year is the hardest because it gets into this sort of summer season, and